And I think we have audio. And I think we are at 2 minutes past, 2.5 minutes past. So let's kick off Ubucon 2015. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you. So I kind of guessed, and I did do the uppercase C when I made my slides, but it is something I struggle with, and I appreciate you guys voting on this earlier. We'll use this going forward. I think that had the majority votes there. So a couple of housekeeping things. We have an action-packed day today. As you know, the rest of Scale has a schedule that is like most of the Saturday, Sunday stuff is 90-minute talks with a half-hour break. But just as Ubuntu forked Debian to do its own thing, Ubucon forks Scale, and we have our own release cadence, if you will. So here, talks start on the hour, and every talk then is between 45 minutes and an hour, depending upon whether it's adjacent to lunch or end of the day. So most of the talks have at least a 15-minute break between them. So they start on the hour, a little bit of break, not as much break time as you might be used to. So if you expected to dash off to Carl's Jr. between talks, run really fast. Otherwise, whatever snacks and stuff you can grab here, it would be great. But it was the way we could pack in as many speakers as we managed to do here, since we have only one day together. We have lunch at noon, along with the rest of Scale, so you can see your other Scale pals and talk about how much fun you're having at Ubucon. So that's our housekeeping stuff. Also important is a little bit of gratitude here, because to make Ubucon happen requires a lot of people, most importantly, the community. It's always been a community thing. It's always been something where a bunch of people in the community said, are we here low or high? Okay. A bunch of people in the community just wanted to make an Ubucon because it seemed like a fun thing to do. And so Ubucon is very much a community-driven event by the community for the community. That said, the folks at Canonical have done a wonderful job in helping to promote the event and support Ubucon every year. And this year, they're coming through even more. As you saw on the schedule, we have more Canonical speakers than we've had before. And we have something extra special this year. And so I'm going to try to compress my talk so we have plenty of time to handle this most important piece of housekeeping. Canonical brought all of you folks today T-shirts. Ubuntu T-shirts, yes they did. And Michael had to carry the box all the way from the UK. So yeah, it was a long haul, but he made it happen. But Canonical has been very supportive, and it's just nice to have that great support. Also, AV setup is put together by members of the San Gabriel Valley Linux user group and many other volunteers, and they make all of this stuff, the slides, everything, work really, really smoothly under the direction of Gareth and Elon, who founded Scale. And if you come to Scale as often as I do, for you, I hope it is, as it is for me, it's my favorite event of the year. And I go to a lot of conferences, I go to a lot of things, but they managed to get something that has grown. This is the first year Scale is a 4-day event. It's grown and grown and grown, and they still retain that flavor of really great fun that makes it what it is. So it's an amazing thing that they've done. The most important contributor, though, for all of this is you folks showing up here and being here. So for all of these people who make Ubucon happen, can we have a round of applause, please? So this is my talk, Ubuntu, the third platform, and you. And it sort of brings together some ideas which form a bit of a theme that we have for this year's Ubucon. The theme is, more or less, creating solutions with Ubuntu. Ubucon has sort of grown by itself as well, along with Scale, and so it used to be sort of an unconference where talks just happened and we needed to schedule speakers in advance. This year we had so many people wanting to speak, we were able to sort of curate them and arrange them into a bit of a story arc. So the story is about creating solutions, and this talk will sort of orient to all that. And key to this, to kick that off, is this concept of the third platform. So there are 3 platforms, according to IDC and some of the other analysts that have been running around, using this phrase, the third platform, over the last year. I'm seeing it a lot in last quarter and this quarter. So what is the third platform? Well, the first platform is mainframes. In the olden days, only really big companies had computers, and nobody else had one until the second platform, personal computers. Suddenly, the cost of computing got small enough where each of us could have a computer in our home, in our office, and that was good. So what is then the third platform that describes where we are today? We went from mainframes to personal computers, and we're here. Well, we hear, morning George, we hear that it's all about mobile. And so we hear that it's a post-PC era. And it's a post-PC era if this is the chart you're looking at. And this chart shows, this is we are here, but this chart's about a year old, so we're actually right about there. And if you've been following tablet statistics, as we get to a few slides later, you realize that the tablet projections are a little bit fanciful. But the whole point here is to create a very exciting picture for smartphones and a very scary picture for PC vendors. So several years ago, we started hearing this phrase about the post-PC era and how PCs are dead, and right now it's all about smartphones, and that perspective is driven by this one index of device sales. And but that's one metric. So what happens if we look at other metrics? We get a different picture. So here, borrowing that line from that wonderful Monty Python movie, "I'm not quite dead yet." These are some other statistics. So once we start to broaden our perspective and look at different factors, we see a very different story. This is visitors at online retail, and this is by device type. So the light gray area is PC. This is 2013 in August. The next one is 2014. So light gray is PC, dark gray is tablet, orange is smartphone. So we can see definitely that mobile, collectively tablet and smartphone together, are beginning to offset PC use, so that PC today is a minority. It's a minority as in barely a minority, it's 49%. And so it is there, but it's still by far, as a device type, as a category, it's pretty substantial. But the real kicker for this is PCs seem to be holding on okay. This is just site visits. The next slide shows closers. People actually clicking the buy button, filling in the information, and making a purchase. When people are closing a sale at an online retailer, PCs are strongly where they're preferring to do that. What we find, and when we interview people during Christmas season, things like this, what we see is that people like shopping for their phones, they like loading up their shopping cart, they like doing their evaluations, but when it comes time to do a lot of typing, to type in credit card numbers and stuff like that, they don't want to do that on their phone. They want to do that on a PC. So, as a friend of mine likes to say, PCs are for closers. So, that's what they're doing with that. We look at other metrics now. Tablets, huge growth story, kind of. In the US and Europe, sales are beginning to level off. They're leveling off much like the way netbooks leveled off until Chromebooks came along, which are currently the biggest growth segment. So tablets are important, but they're not the big growth story they used to be. And here, you know, the other charts I showed you were for the US market. These are some stats from Europe. So we can look at different regions and get an even more different picture. This is internet use by device type. The smaller bars, roughly half the size or less of the bigger bars, the smaller bars are mobile phones. The big bars are PCs. And this is where people are consuming their internet traffic. This is where they're spending internet time. And we see here, Ireland, Poland, Spain, many countries throughout Europe. So let's take a look now at that first chart, and let's just rethink what we've learned now that we look at other data points. Well, smartphones are a big deal. They're a big part of this third platform. And tablets are a big deal, even if they are slightly leveling off, and this projection is maybe a little fanciful. That's how analysts earn their living. We don't want to take that away from them. But they are there, they are growing somewhat. But the interesting thing, the most interesting thing that I find here, is that the personal computer stuff, which on this chart looks very small, is continuing to grow at the same growth rate that it has for 15 years. Unchanged by the advent of the smartphone and unchanged by the advent of the tablet. So we're told it's a dead thing and it's part of the past, but we still see continued growth. It's not rapid growth, and the reason it's not rapid growth is because the ones we bought last year are still pretty good. They work fine. Mobile phones have radical technology shifts every year. The phones that are available this year are much better than last year. PCs last year were pretty good. The year before that, pretty good. So we tend to upgrade those a lot slower, and so when you're looking solely at device types as a sale, you might think it's a mobile picture, but when you look at usage of devices, we see a very different, a more mixed picture. So in this worst year of PC sales, which was not last year there was actually a bigger increase in sales growth, but 2013 was the scary story for the PC is dead. 2013 was worst year in more than a decade. In that worst year, more than 350 million new PCs were put into service alongside existing PCs that remained in use. And that's a bad year. So are we in a post-PC era? Is that really what the third platform's about? Well, a lot of people would like to tell us that. They write about these articles. We see them in the magazines, which leaves us with the question, of all the articles written about the death of the PC, how many were written on a phone? When you have work to do, you're probably going to turn to your PC. So we love the phone because the phone is the computer we have with us all the time. But it is a smaller screen, and if you haven't seen what David Lynch has to say about watching movies on a phone, he has some choice words that I can't repeat here, but he loves movies. So they're great for many things, and it's great that we have them with us, and we can do things with those that we can't do with any other device type. But then we also have the other device types for the things we can't do with the phone. So when we look at the third platform, what we see is, yes, it is about phones and tablets and PCs. And increasingly, we're beginning to get into wearables and now Internet of Things, the various devices in our houses where we can have a refrigerator letting our watch know that we're low on milk when we're at the store because it knows the milk amount in our refrigerator, it knows that we're at the store, it knows that that's information we might want at that moment. So all of this stuff tied together through the cloud. It's not about a single device type. It's not about the death of any of them or the exclusive dominance of any of them, but about how all of them work together as a cohesive mix of things where we're using the device we want for a given purpose at a given time. And this bodes very well for Ubuntu because Ubuntu is everywhere. There's a desktop version, there's a touch version on phones, and do we have tablet shipping soon? Okay, not yet. So anxious. So anxious, that'll be happening. And we have some phone stuff today. Lots of good phone stuff. Michael Hall is here, so that's going to be good to see. Ubuntu Core, Mark Shuttleworth gave a great talk on that, an interview about that, where he was talking about how he can play a role as the hub for Internet of Things solutions. And then, of course, Ubuntu Server is one of, if not at this point, the leading solution for server needs. So Ubuntu is everywhere. And in this third platform world where it's really about a mix of devices, Ubuntu is really well positioned for this. Now it's time to look beyond the OS. So we have an OS, and it's a great OS, and it will cover all of our needs. Now the question is, how do we get more people to enjoy the OS? This is the part that took me a long time to really fully appreciate because I love Ubuntu, but I also use Ubuntu every day. And I got this perspective that applications, at the end of the day, no matter how good an OS is, it's the applications that define the scope of what we do with our computers. Imagine if you had an OS that had no apps. Now, as Ubuntu users, you never have that because as Ubuntu users, when you get your OS, it comes with a lot of great apps, and most of your basics are covered in the base install. You've got an Office suite, email, browsing, and a whole lot more, and the Software Center to get even more than that. But if you talk with people about, hey, Ubuntu's revolutionized my Office, maybe you could revolutionize yours, let's have a conversation about that. And inevitably, there's some niche category of software that they need that they don't have. It's something like a particular type of double-entry bookkeeping, or they need to manage a certain type of inventory a certain way. I have a friend whose sole living is making software specifically for the event rental industry. Very vertical market, very specialized software. That's what he does, and if you are in that business, you probably want that type of specialized software. So there are a lot of things where we might love the OS, but we need the applications to be there in order to be able to use that OS within our organization. And so we have sometimes a bit of a chickens and eggs thing. And Matthew Paul Thomas talked about this many years ago at UDS, and so much has happened since then. Because if you haven't been there, there's the wonderful developer.ubuntu.com, which looks so different from when Matthew Paul Thomas showed it back then. Now it's a great resource for developer information. But as users, and as people who like to tell friends about what we do, we see a bit of a chickens and eggs thing, where we see that end users need to see more OEMs on board. That is to say, like how many people actually use Ubuntu more or less daily, right? Amongst, yeah, right, because you're at Ubucon, of course, you use Ubuntu. So what this means is there's a gene pool, and there's a slice of the gene pool of those people who will buy a computer that has an OS and then replace it with something their friend told them to download from the internet, right? That sounds like crazy pants to most people, but you're that person. I'm that person. All the Ubuntu people we know, we do that. Sometimes we buy Ubuntu pre-installed, but often we buy whatever hardware we want because we can, and Ubuntu will run on just about anything. And then we replace it. We take whatever OS was there, put in something we actually like, and then we have a great time. But for the average person, they need to be able to walk in they need to be able to buy a computer with Ubuntu pre-installed. As a friend of mine likes to point out, he refers to it as a whole product solution, that an OS without a computer isn't really a thing for most people. People buy a computer and it has an OS, and that's how they conceptualize that product as a whole product. So what a user needs to see, and what I'd love to see, is to be able to walk into Fry's and there's an aisle of Windows machines and an aisle of Macs and an aisle of Ubuntu machines. And that's going to take us past a certain tipping point with adoption, and it's something that users need to see. So how do we get OEMs on board? Well, OEMs, they want to do this. But what they want to do is to be able to make sure that the customer is well satisfied for all of their needs. So the OEMs want to see more apps. So we talk with app developers, and the app developers say, you know, I can take on the cost of porting to another platform if I had more users. So the users need OEMs, the OEMs need the apps developers need more users, and you see where this is going. How do you break out of this chickens and eggs conundrum to really break past the tipping point and get rapid adoption of Ubuntu everywhere? OEMs are on board. These are not just slides that I pulled off the internet, though they are. I pulled these off of canonical blogs because every machine that we're seeing here, and this is just a very few, these are machines that were released in 2014 with Ubuntu pre-installed, sold at retail. These are machines from Asus, HP, Dell, Lenovo. For these, yeah, and there are others as well. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, Dell announced, and if Barton George sees this tape, Barton, thank you. Barton heads up a project at Dell called Sputnik. Sputnik is how can we bring Ubuntu to people within the Dell product line by shaping certain corners of the product line in an area where it's really well suited for the Ubuntu audience, where Ubuntu makes a really good fit. So a few years ago, they rolled out their first Sputnik, which was an XPS 13, marketed as a developer machine. Just a couple weeks ago, they announced a super beefy workstation. It's this guy here, and I can't remember the model name. It's like the M1800, do you recall? Fabulous machine, great specs. One of the most powerful laptops you can buy, Ubuntu pre-installed. So a lot of times we'll see, vendors, Asus, Acer, and they'll have some Ubuntu pre-installed machines. You can find them at Newegg and so forth. But with Dell, they've upped the game, and they have one of the beefiest machines that's in their inventory now with an Ubuntu option. So the OEMs are coming on board, and a lot of this has to do with the work done at Canonical. And it's also worth noting that the folks at Canonical maintain a pretty good staff of certification teams. These are teams that take new machines from various vendors and then make sure that Ubuntu runs well on them. And if there has to be something updated or changed, or a custom driver or custom packaging, they work with the vendor to resolve that. And so you can see at the hardware certification page at ubuntu.com, huge database of current machines, and that's the result of the packaging team. But as far as being able to buy Ubuntu pre-installed, it's not common that you'll see these in retail in the States, but it is common that you'll see these in India, Taiwan, Eastern Europe, some Western European locations. I didn't get a chance to include it here, but I had a friend sent me a slide of an Ubuntu sign hanging out of a computer shop in Italy. So it's happening bit by bit. So that's getting there, and that's a lot of the work that Canonical's been doing to work with these vendors. We also have smaller vendors that we hope one day become as big as HP and Dell. Zareason and System 76, who are on the trade show floor, ship systems with Ubuntu pre-installed, and they're great systems. And then this one I'm really kind of excited about. Intel, not a small name. Intel is making their Compute Stick, and it's going to be released next month, $89. It's got an HDMI port. You plug it into your TV. It has Bluetooth. Use a Bluetooth keyboard, and you now have a fairly large screen display with Ubuntu pre-installed. They're selling it for $89 US. Yeah, I've got it marked on my calendar, and I knock off the days waiting for the release of that product. I really want that. That's going to be a lot of fun. So we are seeing OEM support. The chickens and egg cycle is being broken on that front. The real crux right now is how do we get mo better apps? We want them, we need them, and it's going to make the difference for a lot of the niches, at least among people I talk to. The work they do needs to be supported by these specialty market, vertical market apps, we call them. So there are a couple of different options we can to get more beta apps. One is we port them from other OSs. Jerry Carr was the vice president of marketing at Canonical a few years back when he ran a survey of Ubuntu users. And one of the survey questions was, what app would you like to see ported to Ubuntu above all others? The answer was, oddly enough, Adobe Photoshop. And if you use GIMP, that seems like an odd thing because GIMP is a great product. GIMP does more than I need from graphics, and it handles it really, really nicely. And with the UI changes they've made in recent years for the single window option, it's just a joy to work with. The problem is, there are some professional graphic designers who need to trade files with other people. And there's an entire ecosystem that they're built in with. And that whole workflow is proprietary, it's vendor specific. Good or bad, it's just what they do. So those people need Photoshop. And there are apparently enough of them that, for them, when Mr. Carr asked them, what would you like to see ported, they said, yeah, Photoshop, kind of need that. There are other things too. So porting from other platforms can be useful. And if anyone at Adobe is watching this, one thing to remember when you're porting to something like Ubuntu is you're not only getting more customers, but now you have an option. So if you have a problem with Apple or Microsoft and you want some negotiating leverage, it's great to have a third option there. Think about that. There are a lot of benefits. One of the reasons Intel has been so heavily investing in Linux is that it gave them a better relationship with Microsoft, because they have a mix of things that they do, and it's no longer about everyone doing what one company says. It gives them the freedom to consider their options well. The other thing we can do is we can talk with vendors about developing new apps for Ubuntu. And so if you have a need, if you work with somebody and the organization is like, yeah, I would love to use Ubuntu, but there's this one thing we do in the mailroom, and I don't have an app for this, and it's on Windows, so we have one machine over here that does Windows. If you know somebody who makes software, talk to them, and maybe they can build that for you. And it seems, at first, if you don't program for a living, it might seem cost prohibitive, like, why would I put that much into making one application for one organization? But if you use really good tools, and I'll show you a couple of these in a moment, there are smaller, specialized applications that you can build very cost effectively. And so it's not as cost prohibitive as you think. That's actually what I do for a living. For 20, gosh, it's embarrassing how long I've been doing this, but I've been doing this a long time. And I started out doing it exclusively for Mac people, because Mac people love their OS. They want apps. They see the app they want is only on Windows. So their choice is I either buy a Windows machine and learn to use Windows and have that there and run that one app, or I find someone who can make a Mac version of that. And then over time, I branched out. I've been using other operating systems, and I fell in love with Linux about 5-6 years ago. And that's where I do most of my work today. And people still hire me to make that little specialized thing for their business. But there are many specialized cases, and there are many people like me. So developing apps for specialized needs is something you can find a lot of. And if you need help finding resources, I'd be happy to see what I can do to find someone who has knowledge and expertise in your area. Another option, and this I think is the most fun, and this was really one of the things I want to help you consider doing, is build these apps yourself. And you're like, I'm not a programmer. I wasn't a programmer when I started either. I'm in LA, so you all know what I was. I was a film student. That's what we do here. We all moved to LA to go to film school, and then I discovered programming, and then I dropped out of film school because programming was much more fun. And then I became a programmer in the course of programming. So there are things you can do. We'll get to that in a minute, but just one thought about porting apps. If you see an app that you want, and it's only available for another platform, it never hurts to ask. Email the vendor, ask the vendor. It's like, hey, I use Ubuntu, and I like your app, and I love Ubuntu, and I'd like to use your app on Ubuntu. But I'm not going to buy some other computer just to run your app. So do you have a version for Ubuntu? Would you consider it? And many times the answer is, what's Ubuntu? And that's okay. That's okay, because that's the answer to your phone call. And then you call them, and then you call them, and you call them. And if everybody calls them and says, hey, can I have an Ubuntu version? Eventually they'll listen. Sound silly? It worked for Netflix. How many of you enjoy Netflix on your Ubuntu laptop? Right. I used to call every 6 months. I figured less than 6 months is harassment. More than 6 months, but more than 6 months isn't in my interest. I wasn't subscribing to Netflix, and I wanted it. But all my computers run Ubuntu. So there's no point in paying that money if I can just watch it on my TV and nothing else. And I would call them and ask them and tell them exactly that. It's like, I want to be your customer. Shut up and take my money. I want to give you my money, but I need one corner of this that isn't addressed. Well, they heard. And it was not just them. It was the Chrome team at Google did a lot of the legwork to make that happen. But now if you're using Chrome and Ubuntu, you can happily do Netflix. And once that happened, I signed up. Now I'm a happy Netflix customer. So after Netflix, I realized, yeah, it helps. Just ask. Just ask. Sometimes a vendor, if they hear it enough, they'll talk to their devs and say, go to developer.ubuntu.com, see, is this really hard to do? And in many cases, with the tools they've got there, it's like, it's not that hard. Let's do it. Let's make these people happy. We'll take their money. So as far as building them yourself, this is where the fun starts. And there is a Surgeon General's warning that comes with this. If you start tinkering with application development, you may become seriously addicted. It may begin to take over your life and your weekends and your evenings. There are parties that you'll get invitations for, and you'll say, I'd like to help you, but I'm coding. It's going to happen. Just know this in advance before you get into it. So there are so many ways to build apps. And Michael's going to show some here, mostly for touch, but maybe on desktop as well. And they're kind of related, Qt? Yeah. So, and that's a great toolkit, and he's going to go into in-depth with that. Most of my work is on desktop, so there are 3 languages that I'm familiar with for desktop use. One of which, full disclosure, I'm the community manager for. And I'm not going to really get into depth with a lot of these. I just want to introduce them as 3 of the many options that are out there for building graphical user interface-driven apps for the desktop. Probably the most popular choice right now is Python. And Python's a great language. And one of the things that impresses me about it is the design principles that went into making the language. Really smart team behind it, really well thought out language, and it's been open source for a very long time, so that it's been adopted into large parts of the Linux and Ubuntu ecosystems, so that if you're using LibreOffice and you want to, here's a great thing about solutions, applications programming does not necessarily mean building the entire application. Sometimes somebody has stuff they want to take from a spreadsheet and put it in their word processor stuff, but doing that manually is really hard. Well, you can automate a lot of things in LibreOffice, and they have a scripting language to do that with, but they also support Python. GIMP supports Python. Does Inkscape have a Python add-on? I think they do, and there's at least one video package that supports Python as well. So it's not only a great language in its own right, it's become sort of a very popular scripting language within other people's apps to help automate things there. So Python is a learnable language and a good language, and it's pretty much everywhere. Another option that I have, one of the members of my local Ubuntu Hour uses this one, so I wanted to make sure that this was mentioned as well. It's called Zojo. It is a proprietary toolkit, but they have deployment for Mac and Windows and Linux. And if you come from a basic background, like if you've used Microsoft's Visual Basic, this is probably your simplest learning curve because the language for Zojo is very inspired by Visual Basic. So it's a good option, especially if you have a VB background. This is, what's that?
There's a programming language out there called Gambit that is very similar to VB as well.
Lord D just noted, I remember, Lord D just noted, Gambiz, G-A-M-B-I-Z?
G-A-M-B-A-S.
B-A-S, Gambas.
Gambit almost means basic.
Okay. We love recursive acronyms in this thing. He just noted that Gambas is another basic-like implementation available. Is it in the Software Center? Okay, well, we'll find out. We'll find out. But, yeah, that's a good tip. That's a good tip. So there's that. The last one on this list is one that I'm the community manager for. We've talked about it at Ubucons in the past. We might do it again next time. This time there's so much else to talk about, and we want to hand out T-shirts, that though I could talk about this one for 3 or 4 days, I'll spare you. Jono Bacon's up next, and we all know you really want to get to him. So we'll do that. But I will say this, LiveCode, what distinguishes it from many of the other options I've seen, and one of the things that's made it very important for my work, is that it is a very learnable language. It is somewhat English-like. When you're talking to a computer, it's only going to be so English-like, but this one is kind of English-like, so it is a very learnable language. But the biggest thing for me is that most of my work is making graphical user interfaces. And with many other programming languages, they have a lot of great stuff for, repeats and putting stuff in variables and all the stuff that we expect to do in the code. And then you want to make a graphical interface, and they're like, oh, you want to make applications. It's like an afterthought. So over here, completely independent of the core language, there's another toolkit that does the GUI stuff, and then you can glue them together, and then you can make GUIs. LiveCode, from the ground up, is designed with GUIs in mind, so that just like repeats and arrays and things like that are core language elements, so are buttons and fields and windows. And so what I find with a lot of the work that I'm doing is I'm able to express the business logic of the application in a way that reflects the user's experience. And I find that that greatly simplifies what I'm doing. So if you have questions about any of these three, See me during break, see me anytime during scale. If I don't have an answer, I'd be happy to point you to resources, but I know people who use all three of these, and they're all three great choices. And then there's Gambus and many others. Yes?
Gambus is in the trusty repos, I just checked.
All right, good answer. He just found out that Gambus is in the trusty repos. Now, is that, do those automatically wind up in the Software Center?
Yes.
Okay. So you can apt-get, but you can also just get it in the Software Center. And Philip Ballou, right after lunch, will be showing us the Software Center. So maybe you can get Gambus as well as part of that. There are many options. Gambus, these three. So if you have a mind to tinker, what you may find is what I did. I started out working in a geophysics lab when I was going to film school, and they needed all sorts of little software, and the software they needed didn't exist, certainly not on the Macs they were using. So I was working with scripting languages, and I started building little things, and then I started doing that for other platforms, and it's become, like I said, somewhat addicting, and it's now what I do all day. But even if you just make an occasional thing for your office, even if you're just tying together parts of LibreOffice, or you're making a complete application, maybe it's so nice that you want to put it in the Software Center. These are great things, because for Ubuntu to be usable for many organizations, it's going to take another 10,000 applications. All those little vertical market things that people need that are on Windows, and we're going to have them here too, and we're going to have them bit by bit, because every one of us is going to write one sooner or later, and then we'll share it around and people will have it. So some other thoughts to tie together this whole idea of creating solutions is very few of us work in a vacuum, just like Ubucon, which is already at standing room. This is nice to see. It's early in the morning. They doubled our room size this year. In fact, you know, really, round of applause for the guys at Scale, because every year it's been packed. If you've been to Scales, Ubucons in the past, it's been a little dense, a little thick, and then, but this year I said, guys, can we get a bigger room? And they came through for us with a double room this year. So this is good to see. I think we're going to need a bigger room next year, but this is a great thing to see. And this is reflective of what happens with a lot of Ubuntu development and why I hang out with Ubuntu people. I like the operating system, but I'll tell you, it's not the OS, Michael. I'm going to confess to you, it's not the OS is why I'm here. I'm in it because I enjoy the company of the people I hang out with. And because open source is inherently collaborative, because I'm taking something somebody else made and I'm changing it and handing it off and somebody else is doing something else with it, it's an intensely social thing. It's unlike a lot of other types of development, and I find that aspect really rewarding. So if you like Ubuntu, and I'm going to guess you do because you bothered to get up, get your coffee, and come in here, there are a couple thoughts about growing and participating in Ubuntu community that I wanted to share with you. One is Ubuntu Hours, which are a great, fun activity, and the other is a thought about Ubucons. Ubucons, plural. Mysterious, isn't it? We'll get to that. With Ubuntu Hours, how many of you go to an Ubuntu Hour in your neighborhood? Oh, this is going to be fun. You probably have one and you've been missing out this whole time. There is one in Pasadena. There's one in a lot of cities, and there's a place at ubuntu.com to find them. My last slide has my email address. If you have trouble finding Ubuntu Hours, drop me a note. I'll help you find one. Loco.ubuntu.com. Easily done. Loco.ubuntu.com. Loco is local community, and so they've got that. With Ubuntu Hours, the idea is that they are generally, as the name might imply, about an hour. You just pick a time and a place, hopefully on a regular schedule so people can plan for it and attend it. In our place, we have one in Pasadena that meets on the second Thursday of each month. And we chose to set up our schedule so that it's in sync with our local Linux user group. So the user group meeting starts at 7. Our Ubuntu Hour goes from 6 to 7. And this way we have a lot of members that are members of both, so they get all their Linux geek stuff happening in one night. And my wife loves it because that's one night when she doesn't have to hear about Ubuntu. I get to go out with my friends and talk about Ubuntu, and she gets a break. So everybody loves Ubuntu Hour. But if you don't have an Ubuntu Hour in your neighborhood, they're kind of easy to start. We found that collecting a couple bucks from our members and putting something in meetup.com has been a huge thing for people finding us. We have stopped promoting it through any other thing now because people just find us in Meetup. So it was well worth the time, well worth the expense to take a Meetup account. There are other ways you can get the word out, but if it seems like a good time, and I can tell you it has been for us, we learn a lot, we solve problems together, we show off, this is the beta, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, this is where they're going with this thing. Oh, look, Nautilus has gotten a lot of nice love this build. All sorts of stuff like that. It's a good time. So if you want to find or start an Ubuntu Hour in your area, let me know. I'd be happy to help. Ubucon. If you think about it, Ubucon is like a big Ubuntu Hour. It's an Ubuntu Hour that lasts for 8 hours. So it's like 8 times as much fun as an Ubucon, as an Ubuntu Hour. And this is not the only one. So we do have this Ubucon at scale. And we love this one, and this is the one that works out well for me because I happen to live in the LA area. So this is where you are now, but this is not the only one. There's one that comes up in South America. It's going to be in Lima, Peru. Ubucon LA, the LA stands for Latino America, and they do one, I believe, annually. I think it's been every year now for many years. And this year, the organizer is Jose Antonio Rey. He's going to be at the Ubuntu booth downstairs. So if you are traveling through Peru, this will be, they don't have the venue details worked out. There he is. Reed, would you stand up so people can see you? Okay, that's the guy. If you think you'd be passing through Lima in late summer, late July, early August, somewhere in there, talk with him and he can keep you apprised of how those details are coming together for Ubucon LA. But then there are more. There's an Ubucon that happens in Germany, which I believe is annual. And there's one in Florida?
We had our first one in September.
Did you really? All right. So this is exciting. So there are multiple Ubucons, which sort of raises another thought here. If you're traveling around, that's fun because for me, Ubucon is a great day. And the great thing is when it ends, it's still not that sad because I have 2 more days of scale. But then Sunday night happens, and it makes me sad because I have to wait a whole year for the next Ubucon. Now we don't have to be so sad. Now, if you travel, you can have 4 Ubucons around the world, but we could have more. Why can't we have one in your city? I don't know how many of you are from LA or how many of you have traveled, but I always run into people at scale who've traveled from as far away as Dublin and beyond. So if the idea of having a day-long event where you're sharing stuff about Ubuntu with your friends seems like a good time, I would be happy to work with you to discuss ways in which you could make that happen. Whatever it might take in terms of logistics, finding a venue, that type of thing, I'd be happy to help if I can because I think it'd be a lot of fun if we could go, where you would just know that no matter what major city you go to in the world, there's an Ubucon at least once a year there. That would be a fun time, and they're not that hard to put on. So if the idea strikes your fancy, let me know and we'll talk about it. So that wraps up all of my stuff about Ubuntu, the third platform, and you folks. We want to get to the t-shirt distribution here, but I just want to put in my address here. We'll keep this conversation rolling. I'll take Q&A while we do this if you have any. A lot of our speakers, I will certainly be there. We'll make an effort to be at the Ubuntu booth. And I'll be working with Philip Ballou, who's helping to manage that booth, so that there will be specific hours that I'll be there, so that, if you want to ask me anything about LiveCode or any of this stuff, any development things or any of it, I'll be there and happy to answer your questions. Some of the other speakers will do the same. And if you need to reach me, you can reach me there. And now we're going to distribute some t-shirts. Now this is always a tough thing because there's a whole bunch of you and we don't know who you are. And Michael called up the folks at the Ubuntu t-shirt warehouse and said, send us what you got. They said, what sizes? He said, the ones you have. Because the ones you don't have that we might want or might know, we don't even know what they are. So we have a certain number of t-shirts. I think we have enough for the people in this room. We hope that there will be enough in the sizes that we need. I would ask you, please, if you could refrain, at least for the first round, of coming up, taking a t-shirt, putting it in your backpack and saying, oh, I need a t-shirt, please. I need a t-shirt. We only have so many. Let's make sure everyone gets one. If we have leftovers and you want to take one home for a friend, if we have leftovers, by all means. But let's try to make sure we get everyone here first. So I'm going to keep this on. Are there questions? Are there anything I can answer with this? Okay. Hold that thought just a moment. Philip? Is Philip here? No. Michael, may I recruit you?
Sure.
Do you want to take sizes and start the t-shirt thing, and I'll join you in just a second after this gentleman's question? Yes, sir.
There was a controversy about Ubuntu giving information to Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
What has that done in the latest version?
That's a very good question, because they actually solved it. Oh, bonus points. Ah. Okay, y'all using Ubuntu already. We did the show of hands, we know that. But every one of you, you're on the train, People see your Ubuntu t-shirt, they're like, Ubuntu, that sounds great. I want to liberate my laptop. Man, do you have an install disk? And you're like, oh, I don't have one with me, man, I can't help you out. Now you do. Now you do. Who wants install disks? All right, here's what we're going to do then. All right, there's too many of you. Take one, pass it along. All right. There you go. So, no, I think we're good. So, this gentleman asked a question, and I'm going to repeat the question. The question was, there was a question some time ago, a few versions back, about those install disks always get people excited. Happens every time. The question was, and we got 3 minutes before break, so let me just squeeze in a couple questions while we do this. There was a question a while back about Ubuntu sending information to Amazon. Let me specify what that was, and I'll even show you what that was. Let me get out of here. I'll leave that up while you're there. Okay, so they have a dash where you can search for things. And when you search for things, now I have mine turned off, but in the search results, it can optionally search Amazon so that it can look for local things and also search for things you may be shopping for. If you want to turn that off, you can turn that off. So the ability to turn it off was in there from very early on. And I think it was now 2 releases ago. In the first build was a little bit rushed, absolutely. The second build had a switch in settings, and now it's off by default. So, yeah, they heard that. Whether or not that's truly a privacy thing is a matter of opinion, but ultimately they decided, why even have the question outstanding, you know. So it's off, but you can turn it on. So that's there now. Excitement. All right. Any other questions I can answer in the last couple of minutes before we get there? I'm sorry? Oh, Michael Hall, who was here a minute ago, has a whole session devoted to showing off the phone and showing off some of the scopes they have, which are a different take on how we think about application use. I think you're going to find it very exciting. If you're not familiar with scopes yet, he's going to show off what they are, how they work, and how we can make them. And you can make them using pretty easy tools, so you can make your own as well. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yes? No? Yes, sir. Oh. Well, no. Here's the Linux answer. You want the Linux answer, or the Linux answer is, dude, sources available. Right. No. So, unlikely for reasons we will see when we see the phone. The philosophy of Unity is unity across devices, and the left-hand place for the apps happens on the touch devices, it happens on the TVs, and it provides a certain consistency to it. They also did a lot of testing, and there are issues. The bottom is a problem because vertical space is at a premium, right? The right side is problematic in testing because that's where scroll bars are. And so what they found is that people were often accidentally triggering a scroll bar when they're trying to get to something in the launcher. So if they had to pick a side, and if they had to pick one side, they decided to go with left. I share the idea that we as users would enjoy the freedom to at least switch. So hopefully someone can make an add-on package for that. But right now it's pretty fixed. Oh, now they did change a few things. You can now decide if the launcher is on one monitor or each monitors. And in 1504, I love this one. 1504, coming out in just a few weeks, now has the option to have the menu bars remain visible in the top panel, rather than, the hiding thing that they do now. They'll have the option to remain visible. So for me, that's a big one, because it's hard to develop muscle memory if you can't see them up front. But yeah, so they are making some incremental changes. And like they say, ask. Send a note in, ask, or actually there's a place, Ask Ubuntu, not Ask Ubuntu. Check the bug reports and see if somebody has put in a feature request. Yeah, okay, well, you know, it's unlikely to change. It might be possible for that to be a community solution, however. So I think if it's important to you, I think it's worth having the discussion, knowing in advance that the answer is not going to come from Canonical, but might come from the community. Yeah, try it. I mean, just pretend you have one there and just try it for a while. And then, I used to have my dock on the right, and then when Unity came out, it's on the left. It's just how it is. And at first I fought it, but now I find I'm actually really productive with it. So it wasn't what I wanted, darn it. But now I kind of like it. So it took me a while to come around to it. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Good to see you again. Oh, the question is, do we have statistics on relative market share of Ubuntu among Linux distributions? As a blind fanboy, I believe Ubuntu has 90% of all market of all computing. This is my belief system. I don't actually have market share stats. I am told that on the desktop, it is by itself 1/3 of all Linux distributions and the leading one. In server space, I hear two different stories, that it's sort of a neck and neck between Red Hat CentOS and Debian Ubuntu. Excellent, excellent. George will be here at 5. George, are you going to bring the orange box in this room? Okay, so we will bring drool buckets, so all of you can stare at the machine and drool. It's a gorgeous machine. All right, we're going to take a break and set up for the next speaker.
We've got
Thanks for being here.
extra large and 2X left.
We have extra large and 2X left in shirts. So if you guys, and we've already given out. So if you guys want a second shirt or something, we might save a couple for people to show up later. But head up if you really want a second shirt, and we'll look at that. I'm going to get one for myself too. Which ones are which?